Okay, good morning, everybody. It is just about 10 o'clock, 9:59 on Wednesday. It's October 30th. Happy early Halloween. Hope you get a chance to have some fun kids coming to your door. Today's a special webinar. We have a special guest, Bryan Adler, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But I just want to remind you, if this is the first time joining us on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe, like, and notification button so that you always get your notifications before anybody else. And you can see the videos. We do these videos live, and then we clean them up a little bit and resend them to you so that you can listen to it on YouTube or on our podcast, which is the Not a Guru podcast. Um, so you can hear that anywhere that you listen to your podcast. And if you're looking for Not a Guru podcast and you don't see it on your channel, let me know because we're making sure that it's available to everybody. So so Bryan, I'm going to introduce Bryan. Bryan, you can turn your camera on if you want to, and your microphone, so everybody can see you. I
Of
think
course.
everybody can see. Hi. Um, so I often talk about your retirement team. And before I do that, I just want to remind you of the goals that we have for our listeners. And the first is to be inspired to make changes. These webinars and you hear me talk about this, any thing you listen to on YouTube or any podcast should not be taken as advice. Advice is very, very specific. Things we're talking about today don't apply to you necessarily. They may apply to you, but if you have questions about anything we've talked about, or if we show examples, it doesn't mean that this is what you should run out and do. This is for education, um, really just to raise awareness, to identify issues that you should be taking or paying attention to. So keep that in mind. This is about education, not individual advice. Individual advice should be exactly that, individualized. So our goals for you are to be inspired to make changes. We look at things differently, just like we do in our practice. I know Bryan does things very, very differently than most attorneys do. And we want you to take this education and be inspired to make changes for the good, for the remainder of your life. Open your mind to different ideas and different ways of thinking about planning and investing. Stay educated and update it so you feel confident in the plan and strategies that are in place and you can make adjustments along the way. So just keep those goals in mind as we're talking about things. And if you've taken my class or listened to this webinar for any period of time, and you can go back, I have a whole video about this, but I talk about building your retirement team, and I have a circle of folks that I talk about, and the top of the circle is the certified financial planner. I think your financial advisor should be a certified financial planner because of the ethics requirements, the training, the proficiency that's required to earn that designation. And if you're nearing retirement or in retirement, I think that person should focus on should focus on tax efficient planning as well. And then I talk about having a CPA for all the same reasons, and that tax planner, or excuse me, tax preparer should be a CPA for all the reasons that I think your financial advisor should be a CFP. And then I'd say you should have an estate attorney. And if you're going to hire an estate attorney, that estate attorney should be a elder law attorney and preferably a certified elder law attorney, because it's such an important aspect of your future. I jokingly always say, I'm not suggesting you're elderly, but hopefully at some point in your life you will be elderly, and you're going to need the specialized guidance that someone like Bryan and his team offers. So you've heard me talk about this retirement team, and Bryan Adler and his team at Rothkoff and Associates really personify that certified elder law attorney, of course, that Bryan is, but really that team approach, and you want all of those professionals working together for your benefit. So when Bryan and I have many common clients, and we're often having conversations about what's best for the client and strategizing in different ways, because he thinks of things I may not think about, I think of things he may not think about, and that's how you want your group of professionals working for you. So let me introduce Bryan, and I'll read just a bit of his bio here. But Bryan Adler is a certified elder law attorney through the National Elder Law Foundation. He dedicates his practice to advising and counseling clients in the areas of elder law, life care planning, asset protection, veterans benefits, estate planning, guardianships, and long-term care advocacy. So Bryan, I'm going to ask you, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning.
Yeah. Um, just talk a little bit about what that means. That little blurb that I just read. You know, what does that mean? Dedicating your practice to advising and counseling clients in the areas of elder law, life care planning, asset protection, veterans benefits, estate planning, and advocacy.
So, Mark, that's a great question. That's a bit of a word salad,
Hmm.
and it can be as meaningful as it is meaningless. The way to conceptualize what Rothkoff law provides to families and how we help is really rather simple in concept, but very complicated in execution. We help seniors and their loved ones find, get, and pay for long-term care without going broke. We do so through basic estate planning, our early relationships with younger individuals, healthy older people. That's basics: wills, powers of attorney, trusts, to make sure you're legally and financially protected. But we also have the practice group through our life care planning practice, which involves about a dozen members of our social work team, our care coordination team. So we have master social workers, licensed social workers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, elder care coordinators who work with those unhealthy older people to navigate the complexities of healthcare and long-term care, meaning aging. We have our benefits team that figures out how to access public benefits to pay for that care, insurance options, state and government benefits, and of course, our attorneys that oversee the entire process. Again, to make sure that those loved ones get the best care possible, can pay for without going broke.
Yeah, and I don't want this to sound like a long commercial for Bryan, and but I'll tell you one of
No,
the other
just it'll
things
just be an
I
hour.
really
It's be an hour long commercial. That's all.
one of the things I really appreciate about what you folks do is when I'm talking about attorneys, I talk about the importance of well, when I'm talking about what we do in our planning, I talk about the importance of reviewing the plan on an annual basis,
Mhm.
and I often say, because you know your legal documents and your attorneys are very reactive. They typically don't get engaged until you pick up the phone or let them know something that's going on. You're very different. You're the only attorney I know that reviews the plan every single year for clients, and that's unusual, and I appreciate that.
It's
So,
you use a good word, reactive. I'm a
mhm,
worrier by nature, and I would rather not have a problem land on my doorstep that I could have avoided. I mean,
yeah.
elder law is crisis management by definition. Our families come in and they're in crisis, and we use whatever tools we have to fix it. But I would rather be proactive with those existing families that we represent, saying, okay, here's an issue, let's resolve it, let's talk frequently. I don't want you to drop the dead cat at my doorstep and say, what do we do now?
Mm. Which I'm sure you run into most of the time, right? That people are not you not being reactive, but people being reactive, not taking
Absolutely.
the steps to plan for these things that are likely to occur in your lifetime, right? It's you've got a higher than 70% chance of needing some form of care in
That's
retirement
right.
if you're a married couple. So
Exactly right.
yeah, so it's better, of course, if people find somebody like you to begin with, and even in their 50s, right? But
The
certainly
earlier, the
before
better.
there's a need, certainly before there's a need. Um, so let's
And
talk
you
a
and I
little.
have worked together on multiple cases.
Mhm.
We've worked with multiple, we shared probably dozens of clients at this point, everywhere from basic estate planning, meaning a healthy 50-year-old family that just has basic wills and powers of attorney, all the way up to those crisis management cases. And I agree with you, Mark. There's a sweet spot to come in. There's a
Mhm.
sweet spot to do that planning. You know, financial planning is no different than elder care planning. If you start saving for your retirement at 25, you're gonna be a lot better off than if you start at 55.
Sure.
And it's very similar to long-term care planning. The longer you wait, the older you are, the less healthy you are, the fewer options you'll have. And I used this analogy yesterday in a discussion I was having with a prospective client. When you plan early, you're in charge of what happens to you. It happens
Mhm.
with you.
Mhm.
Whereas when you come in during that crisis, everything's happening to you.
Mhm.
You may lose the cognitive or physical ability to make those decisions or participate in them because you haven't taken the early approach. You came in when it was a crisis. Unfortunately, the bulk of our families are in crisis because
Yes.
no one checks the batteries. They call when they see smoke.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good analogy. Yeah. So now that we know that people should be acting early, let's talk about some of the reasons behind that.
Absolutely.
So people understand that, and they hear it all over, right? That's you have a 70% chance of needing some form of care, extended care in your during your retirement. People hear that all over the place, and nobody. I've never had anybody say, "Well, that's not true." I've had a few people say, "Well, I won't need long-term care."
There's always a few. They
There's
say
yeah,
they've got
right.
a plan.
But most people, if they're really checking in with themselves, are being realistic and saying, okay, there is a chance that I'll need this. They'd like to kind of push it aside. But if we pull out the issues and address it, we can show them and give people comfort in knowing, okay, this is how you're going to, let's hope you don't need it, but this is how you're going to address it if you do. And that just allows people to live their lives a bit better. But now that we know that there's that need, the need, or that they should be planning for that, what are some of the things they should really be paying attention to? And we titled this "The Realities of Aging in America." So let's talk about some of those realities.
You know what? Why don't we? I'll share my screen. Let's go
Mhm.
through a couple of those slides because I did prepare a
Yep.
few informational slides that I think create a great foundation. And then we'll come back to and we'll discuss it a little bit more. I'm going
Sounds
to go
good.
to my screen share and it'll start in a few moments. I'll switch to that PowerPoint and we'll go over some statistics that are a little stark. And Mark, can you confirm that you can see that for me?
I see it. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we're kind of jumping into the middle here. There's a couple of entry slides, but given that you've already done such a great introduction, what I think I'd like to walk through is what the care options are and then how we pay for them. So when we're looking at long-term care here, oh, apologies. We have a variety of options for care. There are multiple environments through which you can access care, and I'm going to walk through them. It's down the elder care continuum, and I'm not a fan of that phrase. I think it's illustrative, but it's also very clinical.
Mhm.
But the elder care continuum is just that. It's the options for care based on your care needs, your finances, and your external supports, meaning family support.
Mhm.
So initially, we typically start with home-based care. That's a home health agency that is sending in a home health aide to provide assistance with activities of daily living. Could be bathing and toileting, getting dressed, light housekeeping, meals, and even companionship. Now, the cost for that varies somewhat. The nationwide median is between 25 and $40 an hour. In the southeastern Pennsylvania area, I would expect 35 to $40 per hour.
Mhm.
And the advantage to that is often the clearest. You have your loved one at home, and that's where most people wish to age. The disadvantages are a little more stark. One is it can be very isolating. There can be limited social support and interaction because you have this one person, so it's less stimulating. You also run the risk that there's a snowstorm or a hurricane or a tornado, and that person can't get there. And now the senior's on their own. The other side of that is the cost. With home care, the scalability, meaning the ability to use more or less as needed, is also a disadvantage. When you get to 24-hour a day supervision or support, you're looking at $30,000 a month.
Yeah.
And that illustrates the point that long-term care, the need for assistance, it doesn't stop because the caregiver's shift is over. Parkinson's doesn't take a break from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning. So even though this individual, this loved one, this senior may not need actual 24-hour care, they need someone 24 hours just in case. So often we will look at home care l- as much as a social issue as it is a financial issue. And that's what will frequently lead seniors and families and their loved ones to explore assisted living, personal care, and memory care. And that's a mid grade. It's an apartment where a senior will live, provide the building itself provides all the care management, medication supports, social structure, all the meals on that campus. And the advantages are clear. You have all that support there. You have your own space with a bathroom, a kitchenette, so you
Mhm.
can go close the door. But the disadvantages are you're leaving home, and that can be very difficult. The benefit here financially is it's fixed. It might go up annually, but you have some certainty that you're going to pay within a relatively narrow band. The costs do vary pretty dramatically from building to building, with the median being around $8,000 or $9,000 a month. It could vary dramatically.
Right.
But inside your building, you'll know within a relatively narrow band how much it's going to cost. And that goes for memory care as well, which is personal care or assisted living for individuals living with a cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's, Lewy body, FTD.
Okay.
And the nursing home, it's the least preferred care environment. It's high clinical care. It feels, sounds, looks, smells like a hospital. It's a
Mhm.
very clinical feel to it. The cost varies pretty dramatically as well, but you figure 15,000 a month as a decent median.
Mhm.
And those are the three types of care that exist. Now there's nuance to it, like informal family caregiving. Yeah, it's free, air quote, but there's a
Mhm.
real financial cost. You can read I've written some scholarly articles on the true cost of family caregiving.
Mhm.
Nationally, the cost of family caregiving is more than our entire Medicare budget. It's in the billions of dollars, and it has a real financial cost on families from an earning capacity, saving capacity, and that's a discussion for a different day. We have adult day centers, we have hospice. There's a lot of support out there, but I would like to dispel a common misconception. Hospice is free, meaning it's a Medicare benefit, so it's paid for
Mhm.
through your Medicare plan. It doesn't cover anything that we discussed today. Hospice doesn't pay for in-home care, adult
Right.
day, memory care, assisted, or nursing home. It is a supplemental assistance that really is about dignified end of life and comfort measures at the end of life. So it's an additional service, but it doesn't cover anything we discussed today. So, Mark, that was a nice dovetail into the realities of care and how expensive it is.
Yeah.
So, Mark and I were talking before everyone jumped on. It's also important not just to understand the cost, but how long you're going to need care. Because if I said to you, got to pay $20,000 a month and you're only going to need care for 3 months, that's a lot different than if it's 3 years. And the average length of stay is, remember, averages are just that. You have these outliers that can skew the number pretty dramatically. So in-home care is difficult to determine simply because people abandon in-home care because of the cost or the dynamic. It doesn't necessarily mean they're done with the care or have passed away. So there's typically a matriculation. Now, with assisted living, memory care, personal care, it's right around the 2.5 year mark. Really, same for nursing homes. But you'll see here in the fine print, nearly more than 1 in 5 are there for 5 or more years.
Mhm.
So you have this dramatic use, and at 15 grand a month, you're looking at $750,000.
Yeah.
That's real money.
Yeah.
And then hospice, unfortunately, hospice is wildly misused. The average length is 70 days. The rules for hospice are a physician needs to certify that you have less than 6 months to live. That doesn't mean at 6 months they come and they take you off to jail. It just
Sure.
means that that's more likely than not. And I have clients that have graduated off of hospice because
Mhm.
additional supports, they improve so dramatically. But hospice is often recommended way too late. When people are really looking at weeks to months, it can be a wonderful supportive program as long as you understand what it is. And I believe it should be recommended and discussed far earlier than it is, particularly
Mhm.
when someone has a terminal illness.
Yeah. We talked about, can you go back to that screen for a second? Because
By all means.
you and I talked about the length of stay, as you said prior to everybody joining us. And what I said to Bryan was, I remember being at a continuing education event for insurance, and there's an or insurance representative by a company named Genworth who doesn't issue they don't issue long-term care policies anymore, but they probably still hold more than anybody else, right, Bryan? Wouldn't you say? I mean, they were the largest issuer of long-term care policies.
They were. I don't think they're issuing anymore, though, are they?
They
I think
don't issue
Genworth
anymore,
stopped.
but
Yeah, they were huge.
huge.
Yeah, Genworth is probably the biggest one. They were a spinoff
GE.
of GE, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, they were a powerhouse,
Yeah.
and it's a nice illustration of the problem with
Yeah.
traditional long-term care insurance. There are what, a handful, two or three issuers still that issue the long-term traditional policies, right? They're very few.
Very, very few. And we've all seen the issues with the increasing premiums,
Oh yeah.
and it's something most people can't afford anymore, right? So they get these sometimes double or more of their premiums over time. So we were talking about this length of stay, and I harken back to the continuing education course, which goes back several years now, and I was really surprised to learn from this representative from Genworth, the largest provider of long-term care policies, and even though they don't issue them anymore. And she said for the most common reasons that people were in extended care, Alzheimer's and dementia, the average claim time. So this means the average time that the insurance companies are paying for these benefits is 8.2 years.
I have seen a handful of unlimited policies. I have one
Hmm.
client who has an unlimited lifetime and daily rate. I have one client who has a 13-year indemnity policy.
Hmm.
So, an indemnity policy, for those of you that are unfamiliar with long-term care insurance, there are two types. You have reimbursement, where if you spend a dollar, they pay you back a dollar up to a daily rate. Indemnity is as soon as you are clinically qualified, meaning you need some kind of care, whether you're paying for it or not, the policy turns on at a maximum amount. So this particular client is only spending out of pocket $2,000 a month,
Hmm.
but they're getting $13,500 a month for 13 years. So we did the projections on this, and she'll wind up $1 million wealthier after this policy.
The moral of the story is the time that you need. Everybody is stuck in this 2.3 years or three
Yep.
years. I'm going to need care for 3 years, maybe 5 years. But first of all, there's a big difference between 3 and 5 years when you're talking about $150,000 a year, $180,000 a year of funding that's needed or more. And so I'd rather err on the side of needing it for a longer period of time and especially when we're talking about, we're going to talk a minute about how you cover these types of things, potentially. But as a planner, I don't want to look at the best case scenario. Obviously, the best case scenario is you don't need long-term care, right? But the next best case scenario is you're funded in some way for that. You get some type of help from insurance companies to help you with that funding. And I'd rather plan for the longer period of time and not need it than need it and not have it. Does that make sense?
Particularly given, and going back to our conversation before this started, just when you and I were sort of catching up, long-term care insurance, regardless of how you purchase it, whether it's fee for service or there's these new products that Mark can certainly talk with much more education about, but there's life insurance and annuity options. They're tools in a toolkit
Hmm.
to accomplish a goal. I frequently will say to a client, $3 million for a single person, they are right around self-insured. The
Hmm.
way I'm arriving at that, and that's when I say $3 million, I mean cash equivalents, investments. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean a $2 million house,
Right.
because conservatively, 3 million bucks should about $150,000 a year of returns in a pretty modest year, maybe 120,000. That's 10 grand a month, 12 grand a month. Tack on your social security, you're probably going to meet your care costs right there with investment returns, dividends, interest, and your income. 5 million, 6 million for a married couple. So does that mean you shouldn't have long-term care insurance? Not necessarily. Over the last 5 years, I've seen care costs, which I typically pegged growing at 2 to 4% a year, in a couple years spike double digits.
Sure.
So those projections that we were running over 5, 6, 8 years using a 5% growth rate were way off. So it
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean you are self-insured. And there's also families that say, listen, I have clients that are worth 20 million and they have long-term care insurance, and they're well aware of the fact that they could drop the policy and never spend a penny. But from their perspective, they're using found money, meaning their investment returns, which they're doing nothing for. The markets are doing it, is paying the insurance company. Like, why? I had the policy when I was less wealthy. Why let the insurance company win? I'm
Hmm.
going to continue to pay the premiums. And if I need it, great, I win. If I never need it, okay, I unnecessarily paid for it, but I'm not going to let these premiums go to waste. So they keep the policy. It's all about
Yeah.
looking at your circumstances.
That's right. So again, yeah, I said it in the opening, but I'll say it again. Your individual circumstances should be assessed individually. So use this information you're receiving as education, not direct advice. But and what you just said is important because this is why I lean more towards this hybrid type of approach,
Yeah.
whether it's life insurance or whether it's one of the long-term care annuities. And for you folks that are listening, the life insurance companies more than it's been more than 15 years ago now or so, started allowing people to withdraw their death benefit early when they're still alive if they meet certain requirements. And those certain requirements are typically 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living that
Mhm.
Bryan talked about earlier. So it simply is if you have a $500,000 death benefit, you could have access to this dependent on the company and how it's structured up to that $500,000 or a portion of that for long-term care. Um, then there are that's life insurance, right? So you've got a death benefit. If you pass away and you don't need long-term care, then it goes to your heirs. So that's a way of paying for the insurance, having it available for you. But if you don't use it, it goes to who you decide it goes to instead of going to the insurance company. Most people like that idea better. Then there are these long-term care annuities, and they kind of flip it upside down. Where there is more of a focus on the long-term care benefit. So very simply, you get a multiple for the amount of money that you invest in these contracts. So say if you put in $100,000, maybe you'll get 2.5 times the 100,000, 250,000, or 3 times, or I've seen as high as 5 times. Just depends on on you, your age, your health, and the platform itself. But the long-term care benefit is much higher, but then the life insurance part of that is much lower. So maybe you'll get the return of the original amount that you put in, but that is usually time sensitive, and it depends on how long you live. What I often see is a percentage of the amount that you originally put in goes to your heirs. If you don't need long-term care, that passes to your heirs. So maybe 85%, 80%. So these are hedging strategies. That's really what these are. I often say there's no silver bullet. There's no
No.
one answer that says, we got it. This is how you're going to pay for long-term care if you need it. Because whether you have $3 million, $20 million, $1 million, um, first of all, if you're below three, you're at a lot, you have high risk, right? Would you
And just
agree
to
with
be
that?
clear, that's my bread and butter clients.
Yeah.
The
Right.
majority of the families I represent
Hmm.
are $1 million or less, inclusive of real property.
Right.
Like that $20 million client I have a client at that
Yeah.
level. The
Sure.
bulk of the people I'm working with are blue collar, maybe white collar with some savings, but it's the majority of the United States. Is
Right.
these that have saved a lot, but no one can afford 20 grand a month. It's outrageous.
That's right. So when we talk about risk, there's a couple different types of risk. Risk is use all of your money and then rely on Medicaid
Yep.
to cover the your long term care needs, and Bryan can talk a bit about that. And then the other risks are if you have greater than 3, 5, $6 million for a married couple, it's about managing your assets so that you're giving up less to, just like we want to pay less taxes, right? And our focus in our practice is tax efficiency. So we want to send less to the IRS. We want to use the leverage and the power of insurance companies to pay less overall for our care and keep more for ourselves and our heirs. And if that works, then that helps mitigate that risk. Of course, the larger risk is, you've liquidate everything. And I have a story I tell in my classes where I was helping somebody with I don't do these anymore, but the Medicaid compliant annuities. And this woman sat at my table and told me the story of her parents who had an accounting firm. They saved a couple of $1 million. They had a house in Bucks County, one in Naples, Florida, and fast forward, dad passed away, was in a nursing home for a while, passed away. Then mom was in a nursing home. They had sold both houses and went through all their funds, and they had $35,000 left that they were trying to protect in this annuity. That's a big drawdown, and
That's criminal.
that's a shame. It's a
It's
shame.
criminal.
It's that's not an unusual story, right? You
No, that's the bulk of the families I represent is they're
that's right.
given there's such there is a dearth of good information. You and I were talking about this again, when you and I were just catching up. You Google how to pay for long-term care, and there's all these misnomers about Medicaid. There's all these misnomers about the 5-year look back and how to protect assets. And Mark, you touch on something too. When we first sat down, you mentioned the key is your financial advisor, your elder law attorney, and your CPA. Mark, I know one of the things you specialize in is a tax-free retirement, doing
Mhm.
strategic Roth conversions from these big retirement accounts in a very tax efficient way. And again, not to turn this into a commercial for you, but I think it's warranted. The value of doing those Roth conversions creates so much flexibility.
Mhm.
When we talk about long-term care planning for the individuals we represent, particularly actually married or single, all of the tools that we use in a long-term care crisis to protect assets requires liquidity.
Mhm.
Meaning, if someone has $500,000 in a traditional IRA, we have to liquidate that to protect the assets in many circumstances. And
Mhm.
$500,000 liquidation is going to cost you 100 grand in taxes.
Yep.
If you come to me with a $500,000 Roth IRA, if I don't want to liquidate it, but if we have to, Mark, how much do we pay in taxes on that? Nothing.
Zero. Right.
So by your forward thinking and that strategic approach to appropriately restructuring assets, it doesn't make my job any easier. It makes it a lot better for the clients. Meaning I can
Mhm.
tell a client, liquidate an IRA, liquidate a Roth, the process is the same. I call Mark. But
Yeah.
for the families, you get much greater asset protection.
Sure.
So that's why planning early, to your earlier point, that runway gives you all that opportunity to not have to make crisis decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And I do appreciate the commercial. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. I interrupted you in your flow, so why don't we go to your next slide?
No,
And
this is like we talked about. I prefer this
yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
So
So
I'll slide
I'm
you up and to the
thank
right.
you. Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Look at that. So you're just bouncing around. It's like Hollywood Squares. So we've touched on throughout our discussion here options to pay for long-term care, knowing that it could be anywhere from a couple thousand a month upward of 20,000. So private pay is the clearest and most obvious. When you have money, you pay for it. And that's just writing checks. Now, I don't put this up here because it's obvious. I put this up here because I want my families. I want those that I represent to be using the top three benefits: private pay, long-term care insurance, or Medicare.
Mhm.
The reason being, if you can afford private pay, great. You're not going to go broke. You have plenty of resources. It opens doors. You'll have plenty of opportunities and options for the best care, and there's flexibility there. Long-term care insurance, we've already discussed. And Medicare, it doesn't pay for long-term care. I want to be very clear on this. There
Mhm.
is no long-term Medicare benefit. Now, for the first time ever in the history of the United States, a major presidential candidate is talking about expanding Medicare to cover long-term care, which is revolutionary. But even if, regardless of the results of the election, that will be a glacial transition. I mean, it would take decades to get that actually pushed through. So although it creates a lot of optimism that we're finally switching our perspective the right way and looking at this, supporting our seniors as not an obligation, not a responsibility, but a moral obligation. It is
Yeah.
something that it's a covenant we have to care for the youngest and care for the oldest. So those are the three preferable, even though Medicare only has a very small short-term benefit.
Mhm.
The three below are less commonly understood. So Medicaid is a public benefit that in Pennsylvania pays for nursing homes 24/7 if you're eligible, and it will pay for some limited home health care, usually 5 to 6 hours a day if you're eligible. New Jersey, where I also practice, our office is really 50-50 PA and New Jersey. The Medicaid benefit in a limited circumstance extends to assisted living. So it's possible to get it there. Without belaboring Medicaid and without going and making this a Medicaid discussion, Medicaid essentially means a single individual is broke. A married couple is damn near broke.
Yeah.
And it's a great benefit if you need it, but Medicaid should never be the goal. You should never celebrate getting on Medicaid. You should never say, I want to get on Medicaid. You're welcome to say, I want to protect myself so we
Mhm.
can have resources and do asset protection planning and access Medicaid when needed. But it's a tool in a toolkit. All it is a tool to pay for the best care possible. So planning early may not avoid the need for Medicaid, but it can certainly avoid the need to go broke before you get on Medicaid. And that involves asset restructuring, trust planning, proper investment, and tax advice as well. The VA benefit is for wartime veterans, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and now I have some Gulf War veterans, um, and their spouses. It's a cash payment anywhere from about $1,500 to $3,000 a month to help offset long-term care costs. When I was a baby elder law attorney, I was doing VA plans almost weekly because a
Mhm.
lot of my clients were World War II veterans, and there were hundreds of thousands of them nationwide. You're seeing a narrowing of the pool of vets. The Korean conflict had a smaller amount of veterans, Vietnam even smaller, the Gulf War even smaller. So we're just doing less and less of that planning simply because there are fewer veterans. But if you are a wartime veteran, and I want to clarify what that means, you served 90 days of active duty with one of those days during a wartime conflict, regardless of theater. You do not have to
Mhm.
be in country with limited exception. You can qualify for this benefit. So if you are a veteran that meets those criteria, plan now. There's no reason not to. There's all kinds of benefits.
Yeah, that's great advice.
And Mark, as a veteran, you know this.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we have continuing care communities that you might be familiar with the ACTS communities, ACTS, Erickson Senior Living, Rydell Park. These are three levels of care, private apartments and houses, assisted living, and nursing homes on one campus. Those will frequently offer life care contracts. Buy in, give them a big chunk of money up front. They guarantee your care for the rest of your life. It's like a long-term care insurance product. Downside to that, funds can be locked in. And if you choose, depending on the options you choose, if you don't like it and you move out, you don't get any money back. So when you're planning for CCRCs, we have a lot of clients that move in on their own, and the results can be calamitous. You want counsel on this. You
Yeah.
certainly want financial counsel. You also want legal counsel to make sure, number one, the community is solvent. If you're giving this community anywhere from a quarter million to multiple millions, you want to look at their finances and make sure they're going to be around. You want to know, how is that buy-in treated if you run out of money? What kind of care options do they have? You want to go visit all the care levels. I'm not going to say it in a public forum, but there is a CCRC operator that I will not work with families who demand to go there because I know the consequences of it, and I can't support their move to this particular operator because I
Yeah.
know I've moved families out. So it's
Yeah.
something to consider as well.
Yeah, listen, folks, that's vital. So take that as a great piece of education, because these communities are great. And I have personal experience with a family member who went to a really wonderful community. I toured it with them. You feel like you're on this, standing cruise ship. It's
Oh,
just
it's great. They're great.
they're wonderful, but the devil is in the details. You should never enter into one of these agreements without having someone like Bryan review it, somebody who knows what to look for, because when this individual, it was a husband and wife who went into, who signed the agreement, sold their house, gave them a lot of money to move in, had a beautiful apartment. One of them passed away, younger spouse wants to move out of there. And first said, well, that's okay, because her financial situation completely changed with the passing of her. It was a second marriage, passing of the spouse. She said, well, that's okay, because if I run out of money, they'll take care of me. They'll take care of my care. And the when that was pressed, when we asked about, okay, what does that look like? What does that taking care of the care, or taking care of her for the rest of her life look like? There was a lot of, well, it depends. It depends on this. It
Of
depends
course
on
it
that.
does.
It depends how you spend your money. It depends. And I said, and I remember having the conversation saying, what do you mean it depends how you spend the money? And she said, and the person said, well, if she's gifting a lot of money or gambling a lot of money, doing, different things. And I said, okay, well, tell me the criteria. What's the criteria that they use to do it? And the answer was it's up to the board. It was very subjective. So if the ability
Outrageous.
to care for somebody was subjective, that's concerning. So I give you that just as a word of warning that you want to identify these contracts. And I don't know if it's the same organization you're talking about, but
Mark, I'm sure it is. Because we had the situation we had wasn't dissimilar.
yeah,
There was
okay.
a husband and wife. They had spent all their money. I mean, every penny they had. They had burned through all their long-term care insurance, and now they were starting to eat through their buy-in. And the
Mhm.
husband needed a lot more care. And I get a letter. The catalyst for this family seeking our counsel was this letter from the facility, the community saying, we're reviewing your, and it's almost the same, it's like it's the same case. You were reviewing your
Mhm.
request for what they call benevolent funds. We noted that you smoke cigarettes, drink vodka, and you own a car that isn't functional that we presume is insured. We find this to be a violation of the community standards and are going to deny you access to the benevolent funds because you spent money on vodka and cigarettes.
Oh my goodness.
Now, if I make it to 85, 90 years old, yeah, I'm going to blow my money on vodka and cigarettes too. And I'm not going to sign an agreement that would stop me from it. Yeah, I was so outraged by it. And we bit down hard. And ultimately, through the proper advocacy, we succeeded.
Hmm.
But there's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people at this community. I represented one. I can
Hmm.
only imagine how many people this is happening to. And that's, that vignette is a perfect illustration that planning for your a successful long-term care, planning for to age successfully, it doesn't matter how much money you have because all the money in the world is worthless if you have poor care. All the trusts and powers of attorney and wills and contract reviews are worthless if you have poor care.
Yeah.
Everything else, elder care counsel, investment counsel, tax planning, legal counsel, they're all tools to get the best care possible. And that's nothing more than advocacy.
And that's a great point. That's a great point. Okay, these are really, really great points. So in the time that we have left, I want to make sure that we cover points that additional points that you may have, but I want to I want to touch on something I hear sometimes in C. So when we onboard clients, one of the things we ask for are their legal documents, and we
Mhm.
go through a whole discussion where we review documents for certain things that we're looking for. We're not attorneys, so we don't cross into that space. But there are certain things that we pay attention to from a planning perspective, and sometimes I see people who have created documents on their own. They use LegalZoom or if whatever. There's so many things that you can try to do on your own. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I think it's just so important. I clearly have a bias towards professionals, and I've seen too many people run into problems with even poorly prepared documents from attorneys.
From lawyers, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. So talk a little bit about that. The trying to tell people why, because this is an issue that many people don't realize. They just say, "Hey, it's available online. Why don't we just do it online?" But talk about why that may not be a great idea.
Mark, that's a great question. So, number one, for someone that simply doesn't have resources, they have very few, they're very limited assets in the bank. LegalZoom, okay, you want to do it, that's fine. I get it. You just don't have the money to hire counsel. So I'll dispense with that out of, an understanding and empathy towards that concern. But when you're looking at the planning components, estate planning attorneys, they look at a situation, they look at a client as a case as we have wealth here today. How do we efficiently transfer it to the next generation or efficiently transfer it to a beneficiary? They're not looking at the date from now to the date you die.
Hmm.
They're worried about what happens afterward. Elder law attorneys look in the middle. We
Hmm.
look at how do we get the best
Great.
end of life, not the best estate administration. And that's where powers of attorney tend to fail. I will go out on a limb, and it's not that far out. Powers of attorney are more important than wills in I would venture the majority of circumstances. And what do I mean by that? If I died yesterday, my will leaves everything to my wife. She is my beneficiary on everything. She is joint on everything. If I didn't have a will, that happens anyway. If my wife died 2 days ago, I died the next day. Everything goes to my daughters. That's what the law says. That is a very typical distribution. Now, don't take this as me saying you don't need a will.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is very typically, the law is going to accomplish what the will would do anyway, but you still need one. Powers of attorney, there's two. There's healthcare and there's financial and personal. There is no mechanism in the law for a spouse or a child or a parent or anyone to make financial and personal decisions for another individual without a power of attorney. And if you lose the capacity, meaning cognitive impairment,
Mhm.
you lose your capacity to sign such a document, a judge will appoint a guardian to oversee your finances.
Mhm.
A power of attorney is a very simple document in preparation, is a very comprehensive document in use. A proper elder law power of attorney should authorize almost everything possible: accessing funds, buying and selling real estate, changing beneficiaries, creating joint ownership, gifting assets, creating trusts, all of these things. And the reason for that is as you age, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what might be necessary from an asset restructuring perspective, a beneficiary change or gifting perspective. We might need to do those things. So you want maximum flexibility. And I see powers of attorney by great lawyers that are so terribly done. They're very limited. They're not compliant with changes in the law because estate planners aren't up to date on these. They don't use them daily. So that's concern number one. Now, Mark, you mentioned also that legal Zoom concern. Even if you have the best legal Zoom power of attorney, the question is never, do you have a power of attorney? The question is, how do I use this power of attorney? What
Mhm.
happens when the bank says this doesn't comply with the law? What happens when the bank is misunderstanding or misreading it, or an adult child objects to what a spouse is doing? Though this the legal counsel behind it. And the third component with regard to the to powers of attorney is choosing the right agent. So a lot of families will say to me, they'll get the drafts. And we go through this together and say, wait a minute, you're allowing my agent to make unlimited gifts of my assets to anybody they choose? Sure am. You're letting them change beneficiaries? I'm not letting them. I'm advising you to allow them to do so. Well, why would I give all that power to that person? And that's the wrong question. The question isn't, why are you giving the power to that person? The question is, do you trust the person you're giving the power to?
Mhm.
So if you don't trust the person you're appointing as your agent to do everything that they should or could be able to do, don't pick them. If you're going to limit their ability to do things, don't choose them. You want maximum flexibility. And that's what we as elder law attorneys look at. How do we plan these for successful aging, not just to protect you, but potentially protect a spouse, a legacy, a disabled child, or anybody else you care to provide for?
Yeah, great points. Really great points. And we'll talk a little bit more about the powers of attorney. Bryan, are you done sharing your screen?
I sure can be.
Okay. Yeah. Um, the we can come back to anything you'd like to.
I'm going to stop right now.
But
There we
the
go.
you and I have talked about this a lot, but that the once you have a properly drafted and structured power of attorney, folks, don't wait until you need that agent to act to take that to your financial institution.
Absolutely.
There are some financial institutions that are easier to work with and some that are really, really difficult. I'm not going to name who they are.
Oh, I
Um,
will. It's Vanguard. Vanguard and TIAA Cref are very difficult to work with.
oh, goodness gracious. And from a banking point of view, do you want to name that bank
Wells
also?
Fargo, Bank
Oh,
of America are
yeah.
impossible to deal with. You might not be able to say that, but I sure can.
No, I they'll come after you, not me. No, they've got bigger fish to fry, especially Wells Fargo. But
Yeah,
the problem is that you walk into these large institutions and you say, okay, here's my power of attorney, and their first thing they're going to say is, that's great. Let me send it to the legal department, right? Then the legal department is going to come back and inevitably, folks, in my experience, maybe Bryan's experience is different. They come back and they say, this is great, but we need you to fill out our form.
couldn't agree more every
Yeah.
time.
And now, if the person that granted you that power of attorney is incapacitated, well, they can't fill out that form, right? And it becomes a whole issue. So if you're doing the work, Bryan and I were talking a little bit about trusts prior to this. If you're doing the work, finish it. Take it to the institution. Take your documents to the institution. Make
I
sure
agree.
they're on file. I've had people come to us and say, I'm power of attorney for my mother. I need help with this and this. And they say, okay, let's look at the document. And they say, well, I don't have the document yet. And well, that's a problem because if you're acting for, it's not uncommon though. If you're acting
That's
for
fair.
somebody, my goodness, that's a whole other topic. But you've got this fiduciary responsibility, it's a legal responsibility, and it's an immense responsibility. So, but if you're the person who's granting that power of attorney, go to the bank, go to your
I agree.
financial institution with your person, with your power of attorney agent, right? Your person who if you can, or do a conference call if that person's in another state, just so first of all you both understand the rules of engagement here and you have everything set up, because we don't get sometimes we don't get much advance notice when things go bad, right?
And
um
Mark, to your point on that, there's a couple of valuable points inside of that. Number one, agreed, put the power of attorney on file straight away. There's no
mhm.
reason not to. And two,
No
this
reason
practice
not
is
to.
largely dying out, but don't let the attorney that prepared the documents hold the originals.
Mm.
A lot of lawyers keep the original will and the original powers. There's no reason for that. Digital copies are perfectly acceptable. And the reason, at least my supposition, is the will is kept because they want the state administration work. You don't know what could happen at that office. You don't know what could happen to that person. You need that original document. They should be sent to you. The other side of that, when it comes to the financial institutions we were talking about, I I don't insist because I can't, but I strongly encourage the individuals I represent to have a financial advisor, not a brokerage account at Vanguard, but an actual advisor, because I can pick up the phone and I call Emily or Jess and say, "Hey, listen, I need Bob and Jill's statement," and I get it in 2 hours, faxed over to
Mm.
me. Whereas
Mm.
if that's Vanguard, I don't have that luxury. So it will make administrating your life for you and for your agents and ultimately your executors and trustees much easier.
Well, yeah, and I'll also say that one of the benefits of working with an advisor is most of us know our clients very, very well. So
Yeah,
when someone like Bryan calls in and asks for something, we intimately know the details of that person's situation, and can act quickly. Yeah, I appreciate that. Um, I've got special needs listed on my list of questions, but I think we could do a whole other discussion about that. And
oh,
special
that's
needs
a whole other
trustees.
hour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Particularly, there are strategies for long-term care planning
Yes.
that use disabled adult children, not necessarily special needs children, but adult children that might be on Social Security disability for
Yes.
work-related injuries that we can use to really protect assets for a parent,
Yep.
and using special needs trusts. There are really some creative strategies that we use there, so that you want to look at all those angles. But a special needs trust discussion would be a whole hour.
Yeah, for sure. And do you see that that's more of a common issue these days than it used to be, or
It is.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more. And remember, so just to touch on it, a special needs trust is a bucket that receives assets, could be lifetime or death, that is for the benefit of a disabled individual. And the funds in the trust can be used to supplement, but not supplant public benefits. So that disabled individual can maintain their government benefits and have a
Mhm.
separate pool of resources off the table. We're seeing it more because, quite frankly, there are a lot more disabled children. Particularly, we've seen big jumps in autism and autism spectrum disorders,
Mhm.
big jumps in developmental disabilities. So such that the need is there. It's also important, though, that when you're preparing a special needs trust, it's not just, okay, this is where my money's going to go. There are strategies to make sure there's enough money goes into it. So that's where, again, you want to make sure it's not just about preparing the bucket, but working with your team to make sure the bucket is filled properly when you pass.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll have to plan that, folks. So if Bryan will graciously give us our time or his
I'd
time
be happy
again,
to.
we'll have that discussion. We should do a series, Bryan,
That'd be great.
because there's so much. There's just so much to this planning side of it, that I'm just is coursing through my mind as we're talking about things. The So if you're an I guess let me do this, Bryan. Is there
Mhm.
anything else regarding long-term care plan that you want to touch on before and we don't have to end right at 11, but is there anything else you want to touch on about long-term care planning before we end?
I think we hit everything, we hit the high points. And
Yeah.
if I can encourage our audience to take away anything from this, it's that it never hurts to have a conversation.
Right.
An initial consultation is nothing but an identification of problems. And we in our office, we operate very much like a physician's practice. You come in, I'm going to talk to you about a lot of stuff, your family, your finances, what you're worried about, what I'm worried about, and I'm going to put a prescription together. And this is going to be our plan.
Right.
And it could be basic wills and powers, it could be comprehensive life care planning, but you'll know exactly what, why, and when at that time. And it doesn't have to be me. If after this hour you say this guy's a total yutz, I don't like him, I want to, but I need help from someone like him, still call me. I have great colleagues. I'll refer you out because it's important no matter who you use, that you get this done and have that conversation.
Yeah, good point. And so you practice in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Yep. We have
Um,
offices in Doylestown, Radnor,
mhm.
Center City, and Trevose, and then Princeton, Cherry Hill, and Turnersville.
Yeah, it's a big and growing firm, I know, and you've got very good people. But what if somebody's so the neat thing about YouTube and podcast is there's people from all over the country that are going to listen to this, and
Yeah.
if they're outside of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, how do they find somebody like you?
Email me.
Okay. All right.
So I would ask that you make that your first step. Send me an email. Let me know what metro area you're in. And if I have colleagues and relationships all over the country. If for some reason I don't know someone in your area, I'll refer you to the National Elder Law Foundation, which is the certifying board for elder law attorneys, and the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, which is our national trade group. So you can peruse that website and find somebody that you find valuable.
Yeah, great. Great. Good. All right. Anything you want to say to end?
Feel free to use me as a resource, guys. Mark, I
Great.
think, sent out my contact information, but my email address is easy. It's Bryan at Rothkoff Law, ROTHKOFFLAW.com. I'm always happy to be a resource. And thank you all.
Do you have something that you want to put up on the screen while we're signing off, and
So Cam,
you can for contact information. And I can't
absolutely.
recommend Bryan enough. He's done great work for our clients, and he's always a valuable resource to us. And I have to share with you folks that even if we don't have a shared client, and I just have a general question about an issue, Bryan's always available to us and our team. So I appreciate that. But that's the
And you know
website.
what, Mark? This is,
Good.
I would invite the audience, go on our website, ask for an elder care box. These are complimentary.
Oh, awesome.
And it's not just tissues and a travel pad. It has a lot of information. It has our senior resource guide, which is care facilities and care communities in PA, New Jersey. We have a book that I've written called A Life Care Plan. It is
Mhm.
a chapter book based on how to age successfully. It also has a book that my partner wrote, our newsletters. There's a lot of information there. We're big believers in educational marketing. So you're going to get something out of this. It's not just going to be, again, a notepad and pen.
That's great. That's a great resource. Yeah. So definitely, folks, reach out to Rothkopf Law and get that box. I love that. That's a nice little box you put together.
Yeah, we're really
Um,
proud of it. They're labors of love. That book took like 18 months to write every Friday afternoon for months and months and months.
yeah, yeah. We've got a few copies here at the office, and I've given them out to people.
Thank you.
It's well done. It's well done. All right, Bryan. Well, this was great as always. Thanks for taking the time, folks. I hope you learned that long-term care is expensive. It's likely going to last longer than you think it is. Better to plan now. Try not to be reactive. We talk about these things all the time. If you're not talking about it, you can reach out to us at attleborowealth.com. That's attleborowealth.com. You can reach us with questions at all this information. What I'll do, Bryan, is I'll link your information for this resource guide and your general
Great.
information in the YouTube description. And when I send out the emails of the recordings, I'll put it in the email as well as if anyone has any questions. Um, Bryan, thanks for your time, and
Thank you.
we'll see you soon.
Hope so. Be well,
All right.
everyone. Take care.
Take care. Thank you, everybody.